Well, welcome, both of you, Ruud and Donald. Lovely to see you both. Don, I'll start with you first. You've been a great advocate recently that there's probably a need to look at education in the UK particularly, and actually how we can make it a bit more progressive and how we're thinking about things. Is that a fair way to start?
I would agree with you. Yes, that's a fair observation. Yeah. Yes, it's probably worth saying something about why I feel there's a need for change, particularly in the UK, but also to an extent internationally. And we're talking here about hospitality education and related fields, so gastronomy, tourism, and so on. But particularly in the UK, first of all, we've seen that in the last few years, it's been a challenging time for hospitality education. That has manifested itself in a number of different ways. There has been declining numbers, in terms of student numbers, which says something about the appeal or perceived relevance of programs. A number of universities are backing off from having specialist facilities. And okay, there's an argument about whether they're required, but I personally think they are for a variety of reasons. There's been excessive bureaucratization within higher education institutions, which in a sense is killing creativity. And that's a really, I think, important point. And there are also issues about how resources are directed. There's a lot of focus on a research agenda, and in many respects that can be a very positive thing, the generation of new ideas and so on. But I think we have to question whether the output is actually having any real impact or as widespread impact and positive impact as it should. So is resource going in the wrong direction? And then of course we've got the COVID situation, which might destabilize hospitality schools as well. So given all that context, yes, I do think that as educators, we need to take a long, hard look at provision and to consider whether a more progressive model of higher education is now required. And we can talk more about what that might mean, but for me, it's about exploring the student experience. Is it sufficiently immersive, experiential? Does it truly prepare students for life in a more unstable and unpredictable world? Is industry a partner in the educational experience? From our interactions with heads of hospitality schools recently, I would suggest probably not, to the extent that they could be. Is education, could it be more inclusive? And this is an important aspect of a progressive agenda. We've seen in recent months an awakening, if you like, a realization that institutions are systemically problematic for people from particular backgrounds. I think that's as true within hospitality education as within other institutions. That's a real problem. Can we realign research so that it's about generating exciting ideas and actually changing practice rather than being research for research's sake? And then finally, I suppose that I'll be quiet. I think there needs to be more of a cultural focus. Food and hospitality are the great pillars of defining aspects of who we are as people and communities and nations. And we don't put as much focus on that within the educational experience as I think we could. And actually, that would greatly enhance the appeal to young people who are engaged in these issues. So that was a bit of a rant through what the problems are and what progressive education might look like, but I'll pause there.
But there's a really exciting opportunity, isn't there? Because actually I think, although this is obviously a very dangerous period of time, hospitality could actually come out of it quite strongly once we can navigate the next 6, 12 months. Because actually it does bring people together, it does break down barriers. And actually in terms of cultural sustainability, which is something we talk about a lot, it can make a real difference, can't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I believe you're right that, when I was in The Hague and Lausanne, you always got the remark from the hotel industry that your graduates don't join our industry anymore. And you had to give percentages of numbers of graduates that were really embarking on a career in hotels or restaurants. And I believe that's over. So we really move now from hospitality as an industry to hospitality as a function, which you can also use in service-oriented businesses, but also even further in this whole post-COVID area that you can make students kind of post-COVID proof by giving them competencies that are related to care. That is, care for your employees, care for your customers, for your clients, care for your suppliers, care for your investors, for your banks, for your owners, and so on. And that is, in fact, hospitality.
I mean, that's the opportunity, isn't it? Because
that's a huge opportunity. So instead of saying that, okay, we may have a challenge to get more talent into our hotels and restaurants, I believe that there is a lot of opportunities for young people who wish to develop their hospitality-related competencies to work in any kind of businesses, industries, organizations, but also good for your family contacts, for your friends' contacts, and so on and so on. So there's much more. It's kind of a lifestyle, I believe, that is related to hospitality, much more than it's just an industry.
It's a mindset, isn't it?
It's a mindset.
Because at the moment, everyone's talking about community in a big way and rediscovering community and actually care for one another, which has become almost part of our language. COVID's almost redefining how we think about things.
Yeah, exactly.
Going back to you were presenting there a sort of optimistic view of the future, Chris, in relation to the sector. I know Ruud's taking it out beyond the sector, but if we focus on that just for a moment, I agree with you. You know, much as it's been an immensely difficult time for the sector and for education, it's important that we look for opportunities, and it's important that we look for ways in which we can take this forward really positively. And with respect to education, it seems to me it is a moment in time where we have to really reflect and not just try to continue with things as they were before, but look at this new world and say, what new system of hospitality education is most appropriate, given that we are reflecting and the world is changing. And to be brutally honest, I don't see evidence yet that that kind of reflection is going on in the hospitality sector, hospitality education sector. And that's worrying because, as you rightly say, there's a huge opportunity here to become more attuned to the values and so on that you were outlining. But this is the moment at which educators, universities have to really engage.
I mean, the problem here is twofold, isn't it? One, there's no one championing this cause, this change. And also there's too big a gulf between what operators in industry wants and where education seems to be. Is that fair? I mean, you've been closer to it than I have. Well, it seems to be a pipe of challenge.
Probably that is the case, but it doesn't have to be the case. And I think that if you, and Ruud will know this as well from his experience in Lausanne and The Hague, and certainly it was my experience in Oxford, that, you know, if you do champion more progressive forms of education, and you communicate regularly with industry gets behind education. It does work, you know, if you champion this cause. And there's no advantage to just sitting back on your hands and saying, oh, we don't know how to do this. I think we have got to be the champions of a new form of education and really try to drive a new agenda.
Oh, I agree with that. Ruud, your views on that one?
Yeah, well, you know, and goes back to my experience in The Hague and Lausanne, of course, that in fact, it's very simple. You need to have great students, talented, with ambitions. You need to have a learning journey that is relevant and that is exciting, and you need to have great careers and for this output. And if you don't do that, then there's missing something. So and for that you need the industry. You need to connect with the industry. You need to understand what the challenges are in the industry. You need to learn to students how to apply the toolbox into real life situations constantly. So not just only in the internship or through a project, but constantly as part of the learning journey. So I fundamentally believe that hotel schools or hospitality schools or programs should be really connected to the industry and demand from the industry, and that is not a problem at all, to be involved in the learning journey of the students. It's a triangle. It's faculty, students, and industry. And that should work, and that will work, and it can work. And how that works exactly currently in the UK, I'm not sure. I think what Don is saying, there are challenges on that, and there's maybe not really a champion on that, and I believe that is absolutely necessary. And in my discussions, which I had in London with industry people, they absolutely claim that they are willing to support that. So it's not a matter of, it's not so difficult to do it. It's just open your ears and eyes and connect.
I think sometimes the problem is we box things too much. So when education is put into a box when really it needs to be an extension.
Yeah,
exactly. And maybe that's also a point we need to discuss, because for me that's obsolete, that we put people in boxes and we create barriers, which doesn't enhance talent development, I believe, and is also not good for faculty. It's for me, I can't understand anymore why we cannot have different kind of people with different backgrounds in the same well, classroom, I would say, or learning community. Why not? Why is that not possible? Why can't we break up between what we call vocational, professional, and higher education? What is the reason behind it? I don't see the reason anymore. Yeah. It's even worse that you need to be a master in whatever when you are a chef to teach in a higher education institute. For me, that is irrelevant. If that is a good professional, he should be able to work without any kind of constraints in a higher education institute. So I think you're right, Chris. We should maybe also challenge that particular notion of the boxes and the barriers.
I mean, that raises an interesting question. I couldn't agree with you more. And it raises a question about the structures that exist within hospitality education in the UK and whether they can actually be changed from within. When you're describing something, Ruud, there that's perfectly logical, you know, that we should have industry absolutely at the heart of the educational experience of students. You and I share that view, and that's the kind of route that we have promoted over the years. But if the structures that exist within the educational world don't lend themselves to that and don't permit that, then maybe it's not, the question isn't anymore about changing from within. Maybe we need to establish a parallel educational system and just do things out with the university sector. You know, maybe it's time to start exploring the creation of a more flexible, more independent, more radical hospitality education that isn't constrained by these structures that you're describing, Ruud, that exist within the established higher education system.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Yeah.
But I think that's the right.
Just an example, and Don, if I may, and that illustrates also the problem a little bit. It's not about a UK program. Sorry, it's somewhere else. There was a professor from a hospitality management program in a country. He came to me and said, "I am so happy that I don't have to teach anymore. I'm now in research for the next 2 or 3 years." Yeah. Well, that is fundamentally wrong, I believe, and everybody will say that is wrong. But that's more and more created by this academic culture where probably research is, as far as status is concerned, is more important than playing a role in teaching and in learning. And again, I'm not saying that happens in the UK, but it is something I think we need to tackle and we need to be aware of and say, how can we change that?
Yeah.
I think that's very fair, but I think part of it, isn't it, is actually industry has a role to play here too, doesn't it? Absolutely. Because it needs to say education of our young is really important, because actually I do feel for the young at the moment who must be taking a brunt of fear of what's coming out after COVID, because they're going to be the ones who aren't going to struggle to find jobs, yet we're going to want them in 2 to 3 years' time. Okay. So it's more than that, isn't it? It's actually saying hospitality skill sets are really important. Yeah. We've got to make a stronger case for that.
Yeah, and having confidence in that respect. Yeah, and I think it's also about, you know, we talk about the hospitality industry as if it's sort of one well-defined sector, which it isn't, of course. And what we need to be doing is championing good practice within the sector as well. You know, progressive education married with progressive practice, and simply by living that reality, then we become champions of a new and more progressive way of doing things.
You both run 2 of the leading hotel school operations, and now have moved away and done other things. What have, Donald, starting with you, what have been your learnings since leaving Oxford Brookes and doing the Oxford Cultural Collective?
Yeah.
What's been your biggest learning?
I mean, obviously, as you know, Ruud can probably relate to this as well, but moving from being part of a large organization to operating completely independently is quite a culture shock. So as many other people have done, I've just had to deal with, you know, the realities of being independent. But I suppose what it's brought for me into stark light is that being part of an educational institute, which should be about creativity and should be about driving new ideas and providing students with a great experience, that should really lie at the heart of what a university does. But looking back on my experience, I can see that whilst the team I had around me were entirely focused on that objective and that purpose, single-mindedly so, they were operating within a larger institution that, quite frankly, didn't value the contribution that they were making. And that over time becomes very wearing and actually sort of counterproductive. So stepping out of that system, what I've really appreciated is being able to just pursue creative projects without reference to those, you know, who might not have the same interests as me or value set as me. And what I'm really interested in doing now is influencing education from the periphery, in a sense, you know, to stand beside education, and on the basis of that experience that I've got, actually commenting on how things could be done differently, and potentially also starting to create new frameworks that allow hospitality education to be more creative and more independent in the future.
Ruud, your view?
Well, to be honest, I didn't have that problem that Donald had, because both the Hague and Lausanne are very independent and focused hospitality schools, as you know, not part of big academic structures and institutions. So, and that makes you much more flexible and gives you much more possibilities to really focus on what you need to do and what you want to do without too many barriers and problems. I think what I maybe talk about my experience and how I reflect on that, I would say that maybe one element that is becoming more and more important is to create, let me call it responsible graduates. That means that they know why they do it, that they know that there's a purpose of their work, that they're not just applying their toolbox and saying, okay, that's what I learned and that's what I'm going to do, but that there is something behind it. There is a connect between sustainability, culture, being authentic, helping other people, care, what I said before. So the responsible entrepreneur, the responsible manager, the responsible leader, I believe that the word responsibility should become a key focus also for any kind of hospitality and even business school, I believe, in the future.
That's an interesting one, because everyone's at the moment talking about millennials need a sense of purpose.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have you seen that shift happen?
Well, yes, you see it. You see, of course, that if I talk in my time, and I think that Donald has the same, that the stakeholders in, for example, Lausanne, that were forcing us to become more sustainable, that was not management, that was not faculty, that were not staff members, that were not suppliers, not even the banks, that were the students. So they drive you, and they give you that notion of that we should change, that we should fundamentally change even, and they're really challenging me to adopt new strategies and policies around that. Just an example, again, that was 10 years ago, but I think that gets even stronger now. So you really have to listen.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with young people is, you know, that they're massively engaged with issues that are having an effect on society and so on. That there's no problem there. We just need to make sure that the educational environment really is as engaged with these issues and gives them the opportunity to explore them and to consider the impact that we are having, good and bad.
Actually, the hard thing about this period of time is that undoubtedly we're going to face some dark days over the next 6 months. I mean, we get redundancies are happening. The view is it's going to take 12 months, maybe 3 years, up to 3 years to really recover as a sector. But it's even more important that we get to start talking this language now, isn't it, to get this right? Because it is going to be a process of change.
Yeah, I believe you're right. And that means that what I said before, that the purpose of a hospitality school is not just to train students, educate them and whatever, but the purpose is also, and your responsibility is also, going back to the word responsibility, to make sure that there is a connect between the graduates, jobs, careers, and the industry. And that you fundamentally discuss with industry or with society, what are your needs, what are your requirements, and how can we make sure that our graduates or our students will match with your requirements, and maybe even leading that discussion rather than just following it. So leading it as well.
I think that's the challenge. Sorry, Tom, after you.
No,
Is to make sure that we are that new narrative is being developed. Is that fair?
Yeah. And actually, I would agree with Ruud and take it a bit further. You know, it's not just about equipping students with the skills and competencies and so on that allow them to navigate their career when they graduate, but it's also, whilst they're at university, enabling them to build up their own networks of connections in industry and making them, right from the start of their educational experience, feel as if they are part of the sector and normalize interactions with people at all levels within businesses and third sector organizations, so they feel ready and prepared and you know, to step out of university or college into that new working life.
Yep.
Because you're always very good with that at Oxford Brookes, your mentoring program, which was very successful.
I think mentoring is very important, you know, because mentors get a lot out of it as well. But for students, it's a different kind of educational experience. They're building up a strong relationship with somebody who's got a great deal of experience in the sector, who can then introduce them to others. And that opens up unforeseen opportunities and develops a confidence and in a sense helps students hold themselves in a different way than if the learning experience was entirely formal.
Okay, so let's just take a blank piece of paper and say we could set up, you could found something which is separate. What else do you need? What do you need from industry to make sure you can actually make real change?
Well, I think the starting point is about the defining narrative of what we're trying to create. You know, so if you actually from the start say, we would like to establish a new institute that is going to be a partnership with industry, sit down with colleagues from all different sectors and talk to them right from the start and ensure that it's a partnership model and build that into the structure rather than creating something and then further down the road inviting others to become involved. Let's do this, you know, together in a sense.
So it becomes a partnership between industry and education, the school.
Absolutely. I think that's the fundamental way we should go for. But maybe, and that is not that I'm negative, but just realistic. It's also a matter then of industry of walking the talk.
Yeah.
In other words, that the moment they are committed, they are engaged, they help you in developing your school, your curricula, the connect with the industry, that at the end they also are responsible for recruiting and retaining the talent you produce and rewarding them accordingly. Because if that is missing, what I said somewhere in the beginning, if you do a lot of good things, but the industry doesn't bite and the industry doesn't comply with their engagement level, then it doesn't work either. So it's walking the talk as well and keeping the promise.
I mean, it is one of the big debates of its time, is that actually there's been a disconnect between the young and many companies and brands and leadership teams. And I think there is a general view that there's got to be a change in this. There's got to be a coming together at this point in time, which also probably lays the ground for the opportunity we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that also influences the type of companies that you want to be in partnership on this kind of project. We keep using the word progressive, but if we could identify players in the sector who don't take that approach that you're describing and who actually recognize that leadership comes from within, that you don't have to have 45 years experience before you move into a senior position and so on, and who are open to listening to ideas from all levels within organizations, that can bring an excitement and a vibrancy.
Because it's one of the questions I always struggle with is when did we lose trust in the young? Because actually, if you talk about most of my generation, we all held quite senior jobs in our 20s. So why was it that actually, I know partly why it is, but why do you think it is that we suddenly disengaged a bit from helping the young?
Good question. I mean, I'm not sure that we have actually. I think that those, certainly in the education world, the thing that drives you on, is that you get a great deal of energy from watching that transformational process that students engage with and seeing their potential and seeing them go on and make their way in the world. That's a very energizing thing to be part of and to observe. And making their way in companies that share that kind of vision. And there are organizations like that. So I'm not sure that disconnect that you describe is blanket, that is evident.
No, I'm sure it's not.
Yeah.
And Ruud, from your experience around the world, how are you seeing things differently? Are you getting different feedback about how different regions are approaching education?
No. Yeah. The only thing what I observe in many countries, that is not a clear understanding of young people why they should join the hospitality in a strict sense, hotels, tourism-related industries. That is a concern I see, that they just question why. What's the purpose of that? What can I do? They also look to, and not just to the long hours, the weekends they have to work, and maybe the low pay, but just what is the purpose of hospitality and tourism? Is it sustainable? Is it green? Well, actually, it's not green and it's not sustainable. This type of questions you get a lot from young people, and I think we need to answer that. And of course, we know that industry is doing a lot and trying to change, but education has to follow that. And even I believe that education has to go to industry. That if you would like to have in the future talented people who would like to work for you, please change your concepts and make sure that you become sustainable and that you have a purpose to serve, etc., etc.
There's also social sustainability, isn't it?
Yeah. Everything, not just
the college and universities should actually be leading these conversations.
Well, exactly.
The whole principle of a learning environment is that it's an exciting learning community to be part of, and it's somewhere from where great ideas are emerging, and then these ideas can influence practice. So it goes beyond just preparing young people. It's also about stimulating that kind of conversation that drives forward practice. But if you can do that, you also create an environment within which the student experience is greatly enhanced, because students suddenly feel as if they're part of a place that matters, that's being listened to, that is having influence. So it's not just about teaching students in a traditional sense, it's about making them feel part of a community where lots of exciting stuff is going on. And that's the kind of new narrative that we have to develop in a way, and the sort of vision that we have to promote.
I think that's absolutely right. I'm conscious of time, so thank you both. I think that's really helpful. I mean, it occurs to me as a final point that actually there's two narratives that need to change. One is the narrative that education is part of industry rather than being separate. Is that fair? But the other one is actually industry itself needs to change its own narrative, that hospitality can be far broader than just the box of hospitality.
Agree.
That's part of it, I think.
That's right.
So we do affect all parts of life now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And I know, Ruud, you're off on holiday tomorrow, so have a great time.
Good to see you both.
Bye-bye. Cheers.